3 days. She had gone 3 days without a proper meal, surviving only on the occasional sip of water she had managed to find in broken bottles along dusty roads. Her stomach ached with a hollow, gnawing emptiness that left her trembling and weak. Every step she took felt like wading through invisible molasses. Her legs shook uncontrollably, threatening to give way beneath her. Her vision blurred, and the sun beat down mercilessly on her, scorching her skin, turning the sparse trees along the roadside into wavering shadows. Her clothes were torn and caked in dirt, and her hair clung to her sweaty forehead, sticking in matted tangles. She had been wandering, aimless at first, then desperate, searching for something, anything, that could offer relief from the relentless hunger and exhaustion that consumed her. Her mind was clouded, memories fading into the haze of her suffering, leaving only a single, desperate thought: she needed shelter. A place to rest, a place where the world's weight wouldn't press so hard against her chest. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A ranch, simple, humble, but unmistakably a haven of life amidst the barren outskirts of town. The wooden structure stood proud with a low porch, its beams weathered but sturdy, and a faint wisp of smoke curled from a chimney. The scent of hay and something faintly domestic, bread, perhaps, floated on the breeze. Her heart, already fragile, skipped in a rhythm of hope. She didn't know who lived there or what awaited her, but anything was better than the endless sun and dust that had become her prison. Summoning the last vestiges of her strength, she staggered toward the ranch. Each step was agony, her knees threatened to buckle, and her arms hung uselessly by her sides. The ground beneath her seemed to tilt and sway, and the horizon wavered like a mirage. Her breath came in shallow gasps, rasping painfully through her dry, cracked lips. Sweat poured from her brow, mixing with tears she didn't realize she was shedding. She tried to focus on the porch, on the doorway, on the faint promise of relief, but the world spun too violently for her mind to hold anything steady. Just as the edge of the porch came into view, her legs betrayed her. She felt them buckle beneath her, and before she could reach the safety of the steps, she fell forward. The hard wooden boards of the porch loomed beneath her, and then the world tilted violently, everything dissolving into a blur of sun and shadows. Her knees and hands scraped against the rough wood, and a sharp pang shot through her side as she collapsed, unable to summon another breath or lift her body from the ground. Her chest heaved weakly, her vision dimming into gray, and the taste of dirt and dust filled her mouth. She felt herself slipping, as if the earth beneath her had decided she was no longer welcome in it. Inside the ranch, the rancher had been repairing a fence in the blazing afternoon sun. Sweat ran down his strong arms, smudging dirt across his skin, and his hands bore the marks of labor, calloused, worn, but steady. He wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve when he heard it, a thud, soft but distinct, followed by a faint groan that carried through the still afternoon air. His heart skipped, instincts kicking in. Dropping his tools, he rushed to the door, worry etching his face as he stepped onto the porch. There she was, sprawled at his threshold, fragile and trembling, her body barely holding together. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, and uneven. Her lips were pale, and her skin glistened with sweat, dirt, and exhaustion. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her and carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, her body almost ghost-like in its frailty, and yet he felt the faint warmth that meant she was still alive. "You're home now," he murmured, his voice low and steady, carrying with it a promise she didn't yet understand. The words felt strange, foreign even, but they carried a weight that somehow cut through the haze of hunger and despair. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her lips parted in a weak gasp, and her eyelids fluttered like moth wings, but her body remained limp. He carried her inside, each step measured and careful, mindful of her weakness. The warmth of the ranch greeted them immediately, the smell of wood, of fire, of something nourishing in the kitchen. He laid her gently on a worn but inviting chair, letting her slump into its cushions. His hands lingered for a moment on her shoulders, offering comfort without words. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of safety, a fragile thread connecting her back to the world she had almost left behind. Even in her unconscious state, something within her recognized it, a home, a haven, a life beyond hunger and dust. And in that moment, she surrendered, letting the rancher's presence shield her from the cruelty of the world outside, letting herself drift into the small, precious hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally arrived somewhere she truly belonged. The rancher set her carefully into a worn chair near the fireplace, its cushions soft but familiar from years of use. He brushed the dust from her hair and shoulders with gentle, deliberate hands, careful not to startle her fragile frame. The flickering fire cast long, warm shadows across the room, painting everything in a golden glow that seemed to hold the promise of safety, if only for a moment. He could feel her shivering under the weight of exhaustion, her body frail and trembling from days without nourishment. Her hands were pale and cold to the touch, and the shallow rise and fall of her chest spoke of how close she had been to collapse. He went to the kitchen, moving quickly but not recklessly. He could hear her soft, uneven breaths behind him, and it made him grimace. The sight of someone so worn and fragile stirred something protective deep inside him, something he had never acknowledged in words but had always felt in his bones. He boiled water and prepared a small bowl of stew, rich and fragrant, hoping it would coax her body back from the brink. He returned to her side, kneeling carefully on the floor, and offered her a cup of water first. "Here," he said gently. "Sip slowly. It's okay. You're safe." Her lips barely parted at first, but the parched urgency in her throat finally won over. She sipped the cool liquid hesitantly, her eyes half-lidded, almost glazed over from exhaustion. Each swallow seemed to pull her closer to consciousness, closer to the life she had almost left behind. The rancher kept his voice low, steady, and calm, knowing that any sudden movement or loud word might send her spiraling back into collapse. Once she had drunk enough to steady herself slightly, he placed the bowl of stew in front of her. The aroma alone seemed to stir something in her, a memory of warmth, of nourishment, of human care. She hesitated, weak and wary, afraid that she might choke or be unable to handle it. But he only smiled, a soft and patient expression, full of quiet reassurance. "You're safe," he said again. "Eat when you're ready." She obeyed, timidly lifting the spoon to her lips. The first taste was almost overwhelming, a mixture of relief and disbelief. She swallowed carefully, savoring each bite. The warmth of the food coursed through her hollow body, igniting small sparks of strength that had lain dormant for days. As she ate, she realized that it had been far too long since someone had shown her kindness without expectation, far too long since she had been allowed to simply exist without judgment or scrutiny. The rancher didn't ask questions. He didn't rush her. He just let her eat, his presence a quiet anchor in a world that had otherwise abandoned her. Minutes turned to hours as she gradually regained her strength. Her hands stopped trembling as violently, and she could lift her head without dizziness. The rancher never left her side, refilling her water, ensuring the fire stayed warm, and occasionally speaking in soft murmurs that she couldn't always process but that carried a sense of security she had not felt in years. The room was quiet except for the crackling of the fire, the faint hum of distant wind outside, and the soft clinking of her spoon against the bowl. Each sound was a reminder that she was alive, that she was being cared for, that she had found a refuge. She finally looked up at him, really looked, noticing the worn lines of his face, the sun-baked strength in his arms, and the calm, unwavering patience in his eyes. He wasn't just a man who had found her, he was a presence, steady and unyielding, that seemed capable of holding the entire weight of the world if necessary. And in that moment, she realized that safety was not just a physical state, it was an emotional one, too. She was allowed to trust him. She was allowed to let go of the fear and suspicion that had kept her wandering, starving, and alone. When she had finished eating, he helped her lean back in the chair, draping a blanket over her shoulders. It smelled faintly of lavender and smoke, clean yet comforting. "Rest now," he said softly. "You've been through too much. You need to regain your strength." She nodded weakly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and let the warmth of the fire and the blanket wash over her. Her eyes fluttered closed, but this time, sleep was not a desperate escape from pain, it was healing, a gentle surrender to the knowledge that she was finally somewhere safe. And as she drifted, she felt the faintest flicker of hope, fragile, tentative, but real. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. A hope that perhaps life still had kindness left for her. And in the quiet, steady presence of the rancher at her side, she allowed herself to believe it. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower behind the distant hills, casting the ranch in a soft, amber glow. The fire flickered in the hearth, dancing across the walls and illuminating the rustic interior with a comforting warmth. She was still weak, her body thin and fragile, but the worst of the exhaustion had passed. Her breathing had evened out, and she could now sit upright without the dizziness that had plagued her for days. Each small movement was a triumph, each flutter of strength a victory over the cruel stretch of time she had endured without proper food or care. The rancher had been careful not to overwhelm her. He had brought her water, more stew, and small slices of bread throughout the day, all while speaking in a calm, steady voice that never demanded anything of her but offered guidance and reassurance. He seemed to sense the delicate rhythm of her recovery, adjusting his presence accordingly, sometimes attentive and active, sometimes quietly watching, allowing her space to regain her own balance. There was a gentleness in him that she hadn't experienced in years, a patient endurance that didn't pity her but instead seemed to honor her resilience. Now, as twilight settled outside, he prepared a simple bed for her in a corner of the living room, near the fire but away from drafts. The bed was small and humble, just a mattress on the floor with clean sheets and a thick blanket folded neatly on top. Yet it radiated comfort, and to her exhausted mind, it felt like a palace. He guided her to it, supporting her weak frame carefully. She leaned into his steady hands, allowing herself to rely on his strength without hesitation, and for the first time in days, she felt the luxury of complete surrender. "Here," he said softly, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "Rest now. You've been through too much. You need to regain your strength." His voice carried no demands, no urgency, only reassurance, and she realized in that moment that it was the first time she had heard such words spoken to her, not as a stranger, but as someone who cared. She nodded faintly, closing her eyes as the warmth of the fire and the blanket enveloped her. Sleep came gradually, like a gentle tide washing over her, not as a desperate escape from the world but as a healing balm for the body and soul. In her dreams, she wandered once again, but the emptiness was gone, replaced by the soft presence of the rancher and the quiet sanctuary of the ranch. There was no hunger, no fear, only the steady rhythm of safety and care. When she awoke, the room was bathed in the soft light of early morning. The rancher was still there, seated nearby, keeping watch over her without a word. She felt the strange, comforting sensation of not being alone, of not having to fend for herself constantly. In the quiet of the morning, she allowed herself to take in the reality of her situation. She was alive, she was warm, she was safe, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life still held something beautiful for her. The rancher's eyes met hers, calm and steady. "You're home now," he repeated, the same words that had greeted her when she first collapsed on his porch. But now, those words carried weight, depth, and meaning. They were no longer simply a promise, they were truth. She had found shelter, warmth, and care. She had found a place where she belonged, even if only for now. As she sat up slowly, feeling the strength returning to her limbs, a strange sensation washed over her, an almost overwhelming mix of gratitude and relief. She realized that she had been wandering not just in the physical world, but through life itself, untethered and alone. Now, she felt anchored. Someone had lifted her when she could no longer lift herself. Someone had offered her not only sustenance but a presence that reminded her that kindness and safety still existed. Tears blurred her vision, not from fear or pain, but from the intensity of her gratitude. She looked at the rancher, who gave a small, reassuring nod, silently affirming that her tears were welcome, that her vulnerability was safe here. Slowly, she reached out, resting her hand on his arm, the gesture small but meaningful, a first acknowledgement of trust, of connection. And in that moment, she understood something she hadn't dared to believe in a long time: home was more than just a roof or four walls. Home was warmth, safety, and the presence of someone who cared enough to lift her from the brink. As the fire crackled and the sun rose higher, spilling golden light across the room, she let herself finally relax, truly relax, knowing that for the first time in days, she was not alone, she was not starving, and she was not lost.